We just buried my wife when my son leaned in and whispered, "It's finally ours." Name's Ray 64, retired accountant, and I was still clutching Helen's old leather ledger like it could explain everything. The scent of potluck casserole clung to my jacket, but that one sentence changed the temperature in the room. Ever inherited something that came with more guilt than gratitude. Mitch leaned over during the third hymn, the one Helen always hummed to herself, while folding laundry, and whispered into my ear, "It's finally ours." His breath still smelled faintly of the hotel's continental coffee, too sharp, too rushed. I didn't look at him. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the pew ahead, where 2 tulip blooms drooped near the edge of her framed photo. She hated tulips. The leather-bound ledger was still on the dining table this morning, same as every morning for the last 42 years. She always left it there halfway between the placemats and the bay window, a kind of gravitational center to our otherwise unremarkable lives. I hadn't opened it, not since I signed the new will last Tuesday in that gray office smelling of toner and waiting. We were seated in the second row, a little too close to the pulpit for my comfort. Helen wouldn't have liked the organist too dramatic with the swells. Charles, our long-retired pastor, adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers and began her eulogy in his slow, methodical cadence. Helen believed in balance, he said, glancing toward her picture. She kept good records, and she loved a right number. That got a chuckle, not from Mitch, of course. He checked his watch instead. The room held its breath as Charles recounted Helen's devotion to budgeting, both in finances and emotions. He spoke of the years she organized the church bake sale, the exact count of pecan pies, how she corrected the typo on the hymnal fundraiser ledger in 1980, and suddenly I saw her again. Not Helen the wife, or the mother, or the woman in the bed last week with too much morphine, but Helen the quiet architect of order. After the service, people milled in the hall, filling plastic plates with casseroles and banana pudding, the scent mingling with old pine floorboards. I stood with Charles near the donation basket, half listening as someone reminisced about Helen's peach jam. Then Mitch clinked his cup of iced tea and raised it like champagne. "To new beginnings," he said. "And maybe some long overdue renovations." I turned. He was smiling at me, eyes glinting like he'd already walked through the house with a contractor. People shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to toast back. That evening the house felt hollow. I boiled water for tea, though I didn't really want it. In the dining room the ledger waited unmoved, untouched. Its leather was worn smooth at the corners, the way her thumb used to rest while she thought. I sat down, laid a hand on its cover. It opened without a sound. The first page was Helen's handwriting, neat and looping. 1979, wedding costs, $3,827.41. She had itemized even the gas receipts for the honeymoon road trip. Each page was a year, a story. I flipped through birthdays, broken appliances, doctor co-pays, every column lined like she was reporting to someone higher. Then I found it. A yellow sticky note stuck midway through 2022. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were legible. One last correction. I sat for a long time with that note between my fingers, staring at the soft indent her handwriting left behind. It wasn't just a message, it was an invitation. A puzzle I wasn't sure I had the energy to solve, but I owed her that much. Helen had always done the emotional bookkeeping while I tallied columns and invoices. She reconciled people, not just accounts. Mitch never saw it. Or maybe he did and just didn't value it. He'd grown into someone who equated money with memory, square footage with legacy. It was easier for him to measure life that way, I suppose. He liked clean lines. Helen and I had lived in the margins. The ledger had always been a source of curiosity for me, maybe even jealousy. She trusted it with things she never told me. Her handwriting changed over the years from tidy cursive in her 20s to a kind of elegant shorthand after arthritis set in. I could tell what year an entry was from by how much her hands had hurt that day. That, too, was a kind of timestamp. The sticky note's ink had bled slightly into the page beneath it. Coffee probably, or maybe tears. What kind of correction was it? Financial, emotional forgiveness? Or maybe an accounting of love? What was invested? What was lost? What remained? I flipped through a few pages, reading entries aloud under my breath. Mitch, piano lessons, $40 a month. Ray, anniversary trip deposit, canceled. Even now, she'd cataloged our lives, not in dollars, but in effort. Outside, the wind picked up again. Somewhere across town, I imagined Mitch standing in the driveway, already measuring square footage and dreaming of hardwood floors. But here at this table, I was surrounded by a different kind of wealth, one I hadn't appreciated until too late. I closed the ledger softly, not to end it, but to begin understanding it. Tomorrow I'd read more. Tonight I'd sit with the correction. The house creaked around me, settling, like it knew something had changed, like it had been waiting too. I flipped to the last few pages of Helen's ledger that morning, spoon idling in my coffee. The kitchen filled with the scent of yesterday's toast and a phantom trace of her perfume. There it was, an asterisk. Small pencil marked easy to miss. I didn't remember it from before. And if Helen had taught me anything, it was that she never marked anything without reason. The wind hummed through the kitchen vents like someone whispering secrets just beyond earshot. Beside the asterisk on the same line was an entry, KR Supplies Reimbursement, $183.47. It was dated March of last year. Helen had already started forgetting names by then, but her handwriting remained unshaken. KR. It didn't ring any bells, and yet the neatness of the letters suggested care, perhaps even affection. I stood and rummaged through the old accordion folder she kept in the hutch drawer, my fingers slipping past water bills typed appointment slips. The occasional grocery list she tucked there when she was too tired to file properly. I found a stack of receipts, some recent, others fading. A few were labeled in blue ink Kendra, markers, flashcards, phonics deck. Another back-to-school drive, cash. Helen never mentioned a Kendra, but here she was recurring through line items like a silent refrain. My thumb paused on a crisp photocopy of a check dated May 2022 to Kendra R. 500 cents. Memo line, keep going. She never wrote memos. Not for me, not even for Mitch's graduation fund. That line rattled something inside me. The phone buzzed on the counter, cutting through the silence. Mitch again. His voice was clipped, controlled, and efficient. Hey, Dad. We need to sit down and go through assets. I think the appraiser will want floor plans. Let's not wait too long. Call me. He didn't say, how are you holding up, or do you need anything? Just the next step. Always the next step. Back at the table, I sipped cold coffee and read the note Helen had paperclipped to the ledger. KR will understand. If not, the story is in the boxes. What boxes? None were labeled in the attic, none that I'd seen anyway. Maybe it was metaphor. Maybe not. The ink had smudged slightly. Ceramic scraped as I set the mug down too hard. Something about the way she wrote understand chilled me. It was a goodbye. I walked over to Helen's old roll-top desk, the one we argued about keeping when we remodeled. I'd wanted to get rid of it. She insisted it stay, said it kept our marriage grounded. Now I understood. Inside were more notes curled with age. Post-its written in her round cursive, Ray check basement light. Buy pie for Ruthie. Mundane reminders now sacred. In the middle drawer, tucked beneath a tax document, I found a Polaroid. It showed Helen with a girl maybe 9 or 10 in a library corner. Helen's eyes were tired but proud. The girl held up a spelling workbook, all gold stars. On the back, Kendra first full sentence without help, dated 2016. My hands trembled. Suddenly the asterisk didn't feel financial. It felt maternal. The more I searched, the more Helen unfolded quietly, carefully, as she always had. A woman of balance, Charles had said. I began to think Helen had two systems running in parallel, the visible ledger we all lived by, and a quieter one recorded in the margins where kindness lived, where investments were emotional. I replayed Mitch's message. The word assets echoed in my ear. He wouldn't understand this ledger. He wasn't built for soft currencies. He wanted spreadsheets, documents, claims. But Helen's ledger was about something else. Something slower, harder to price. I stared at the unsent email to Kendra. Tomorrow I promised myself again. I'd hit send tomorrow. Outside, the wind knocked softly against the window like a gentle request. I took another sip of coffee. Even cold, it reminded me of her. The cup bore a faint lipstick stain I hadn't scrubbed off. I left it there. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind had settled, but something in the walls kept creaking as if Helen's footsteps lingered, retracing her quiet routes, kitchen to desk to pantry to backyard window. I opened the ledger again under the dim light of the study. My eyes were dry, but I kept turning pages. The columns no longer felt like numbers, they were choices. Echoes. Acts of care I hadn't noticed. Somewhere along the way, I'd mistaken frugality for detachment. She wasn't saving for saving's sake. She was directing the flow toward those who needed it. I circled the entry labeled KR in pencil, just like Helen might have. Not to erase, just to see it more clearly. Then I opened a drawer and pulled out the old address book she kept. Dog-eared, fabric-bound, fragile. Under R, I found it, Kendra Rayner, 84 Gibbon Street, Tutoring Center. I recognized the building. It used to be a cleaner's. Now it was Hope repurposed. At that moment, I realized the inheritance Mitch cared about and the one Helen left were not the same. One came with deeds and appraisals. The other came with questions and maybe answers if I was willing to ask. I looked again at the photo, at Helen's faded smile and the child's joy beside her. The ledger stayed open on the table all night, flanked by the scent of old paper candle wax and distant memory. The diner hadn't changed in 20 years. Same checkered linoleum floors, same wall of postcards curling at the edges from too much sun and not enough care. I slid into the booth across from Charles, the vinyl seat, letting out a soft sigh beneath me. Outside, dusk fell like a damp coat rain, peppering the windows in a quiet rhythm that reminded me of Helen's old metronome. Some inheritances are heavier than others, Charles said, handing me a chipped ceramic mug and tilting the coffee pot toward my side of the table. The steam fogged my glasses slightly. I wiped them with the hem of my sweater, buying a moment. She left you a ledger, he added, not just a house. I managed a thin smile. I always thought she loved that book more than either of us. 2 booths over a young couple argued about baby names. The woman, visibly pregnant and equally opinionated, kept repeating Kendra. It's strong, but soft. My hand froze around the mug. A coincidence, sure, but it felt like Helen was reaching out again. Charles noticed my pause but didn't press. Instead, he tore a sugar packet in 2 and let it drift into his cup, stirring gently. You still haven't told Mitch, have you? I shook my head. Not the details. That boy's got a spine made of want and a stomach too small for humility, Charles said, not unkindly. Helen said as much. She used to call it the hunger that forgets to chew. I smiled again despite myself. She always had a way with metaphors. She had a way with judgment. You've always been softer. There was no accusation in his voice, just observation. The coffee tasted burnt, but it grounded me. The smell of overcooked bacon, the glint of laminated menus warped at the corners. These were the things that kept me from floating off into grief or guilt. She wanted to make something right, I said. I think the last few entries in that ledger were her way of balancing an old account. Maybe one I didn't know existed. Charles nodded. Fair isn't always clean, Ray, but it's better than tidy lies. I took that in. The rain had slowed. The couple behind us had shifted to quieter conversation, their silhouettes backlit by neon beer signs. I wondered if they knew what kind of inheritance they were already building by tone, by touch, by every decision they made with their child in mind. She left a check, I said finally. To a young woman Kendra R. Helen never told me. Doesn't sound like charity. Sounds like a promise kept. She used to say we all carry debts that outlive us. Charles refilled our cups. So what will you do? I stared into the coffee like it held answers. Mitch is bringing a lawyer tomorrow. He didn't flinch. You already know, I said. But I think I know why she wanted me to be the one left holding the ledger. Charles looked at me then, not as a pastor, not as a friend, but as someone who knew the burden of secrets and the cost of disclosure. Then hold it tight. And if you let go, make sure it's in the right direction. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Mitch tomorrow. Noon, I'm bringing a lawyer. I didn't respond right away. I tucked the phone back into my coat pocket. folded the bill under my saucer, and stood. Same time next week. Charles asked, "Depends on how heavy this inheritance gets." As I stepped outside, the wind bit through my sleeves, and the clouds above the diner flickered with the faintest promise of snow. I walked back to the car slowly, my hands in my pockets, gripping something I hadn't realized I was carrying. The corner of Helen's ledger page, torn from my pocket notebook, folded tight around a name. The blinds hadn't been dusted in weeks. Sunlight sliced through each slat like lazy prison bars, casting pale shadows across the dining room table. The ledger sat exactly where I'd left it open, exposed, deliberate. I heard the front door slam without ceremony. Mitch didn't bother with greetings. He moved with purpose, shoes squeaking against the wood floor like impatient thoughts. He didn't sit. His eyes found the ledger before I did. "You left this out," he said, flatly flipping the pages as if rifling through someone's diary. I offered nothing. I wanted to believe silence could soften things. He paused at a page marked Q4 Miscellaneous. His jaw tightened. "KR Supplies Reimbursement. You want to explain this, Dad?" "That's from last spring," I said quietly. "She used her own money. For who? For what? Why? For someone she taught. Someone who needed it." He shook his head. She didn't tell me either. Not until I found the entry." Mitch ran his thumb down the spine of the ledger. "You knew this morning." I nodded. "And you still left this out like bait." He sat then, but it wasn't to connect. It was to interrogate. I thought I said slowly, "You might understand what she was trying to do. Understand what, Dad? That my mother lied to both of us, that she funneled money to some stranger." "She wasn't a stranger to Helen." Mitch stood again. "No, just to me." The room felt tighter. The air held too still. "She changed the will, didn't she?" I didn't respond. "You let her," he spat. "She had her reasons." I bet she did. His hands were shaking now. "Did you at least think of what I've done for this family? What I gave up to stay close? What I passed on to make sure you two never had to sell this house, Mitch?" "No," he snapped. "You don't get to play soft now." He grabbed the ledger, tore through more pages, then slammed it shut so violently that a page caught on the binding and tore halfway out. It made a sickening sound like cartilage giving under pressure. A thread of silence spooled out between us. Mitch looked down at the torn sheet, then at me. I didn't move. I waited. His nostrils flared. "You think she was noble. You think she was balanced. But she wasn't. She was secretive. She didn't believe in me. I think I said she didn't want you to carry things she couldn't finish." He blinked at me, almost confused. Then he turned and walked out. No door slam this time. Just the click of shoes, the creak of hinges, and then absence. I didn't call after him. Instead, I sat down, smoothing the torn page with a practiced hand. The tear had split a line of Helen's tidy script, her R severed into two disjointed halves. I reached for the old tape dispenser, the one with yellowed edges and a fading school project label stuck to its side. The tape held barely, a translucent scar across a moment in time. I ran my finger along the fissure. It felt too human thin, vulnerable, trying to heal in ways that would never look seamless again. The ledger closed softly this time. I made tea I didn't want and stared at the kitchen window while the kettle cooled without whistling. Later, I turned on my computer and opened a draft email addressed to krobinson@mountainpath.org. I wrote, "Dear Ms. Robinson, I believe you knew my wife Helen. She spoke well of your time together, even if not often. I have found some things that belonged to her, meant for you perhaps, and I wonder if you might have time to speak when you return." I hovered over the send button, but then I saw the auto-reply blink to life in the bottom corner. "Kendra Robinson is out of office until Monday. For urgent matters, contact the general line." It wasn't urgent, not yet. I closed the laptop and let the room return to stillness, broken only by the brittle edge of tape catching in the lamplight. Kendra's voice was steadier than I expected. Helen said, "The numbers would betray the truth eventually." Her classroom smelled faintly of dry erase markers and Monday. It was still early, but a few of her students waved at me curiously from behind their desks before settling back into worksheets. I shifted on the too small plastic chair across from her desk, trying to find a comfortable posture that wouldn't betray the unease under my skin. I had told her I wanted to donate some books. That was partly true. But mostly, I wanted to understand what my wife had left behind. What part of her hadn't come home with me each night for the last decade? She poured me weak coffee in a dented aluminum mug. Helen always kept her worlds separated, Kendra said. I wasn't surprised you didn't know. I didn't respond immediately. The folder she'd laid between us was old soft at the corners, the edges rounded by years of use. Its faded label, Helen A. Wallace, Legacy Plan, was written in my wife's careful looping script. A spreadsheet peeked out from beneath a loose paperclip. Kendra tapped the top page. She used this to convince me to stay in education. She showed me the math community benefit against family net worth. She even had projections like she was building an equation for justice. I took a breath and opened it. The columns were spare functional. One had labels like lunch program, teacher aid stipend, algebra 2 prep materials. The next had corresponding dollar amounts. The far right column in bold pencil legacy, inheritance. I blinked longer than necessary. She didn't show this to me, I said. She didn't want to burden you with her battles, Kendra replied. She said you carried too many already. But she also said she couldn't ignore what she saw in me. I looked at Kendra properly then. Early 30s, calm, composed. Her voice was smooth, but her hands trembled slightly when she reached for a binder. Helen gave me these, she said, pulling it open. Her old teaching notes, techniques, formulas, her jokes scribbled in the margins. The binder's inside cover held a faded Polaroid Helen standing beside a teenage Kendra, both beaming in front of a chalkboard that read, "Algebra is a love letter to logic." A lump swelled in my throat. She kept that picture. She insisted I take it. The classroom buzzed gently with the sounds of youthful arithmetic. One student raised his hand and asked Kendra if he could sharpen his pencil. She nodded, and the quiet electric grind of the sharpener filled the pause between us. I was angry at first, I said finally. About what she left you. About what she didn't tell me. You're still angry, Kendra said gently. I shook my head. No, not anymore. Just lost, maybe. This ledger, it was supposed to be ours. A story we wrote together, but I'm realizing now she was still writing even when I wasn't looking. Kendra offered a tired smile. She didn't want you to agree, just to understand. The bell rang somewhere in the building. Her students stood stacking their books and tucking in chairs with the small chaos of practiced routine. Kendra stood too, smoothing her blouse. You're welcome to come by any time, but I think you already have what she wanted you to find. I nodded and rose slowly. The mug clinked against the desk as I placed it down. On my way out, I caught one last glimpse of Helen's handwriting on a sticky note taped to a cabinet drawer. Curiosity is a kind of courage. I stepped outside into the chilly morning air. The clouds had lifted slightly, and Asheville's misty skyline glowed pale against the school parking lot. As I adjusted my coat, I spotted a familiar figure leaning against a black SUV. Mitch, arms folded, eyes unreadable. He hadn't come alone. You gave it to her. Mitch's voice splintered the cold dusk air, each word like broken glass. $4 million. I didn't answer right away. The wind stirred dry oak leaves across the patio, making the shadows shift against the stone tiles. We were in the backyard, Helen's sanctuary. Her rosemary bushes, brittle now in early winter, still framed the garden path. The old ledger, repaired with yellowing tape, and a new leather wrap I stitched myself last night, lay closed between us on the wrought iron table. You sat on that for weeks, Mitch stepped forward, face red from cold and fury. And you let me walk around like some idiot thinking I'd be able to renovate the house, do something with what Mom left behind. She didn't leave it behind, I said finally. She gave it away. Intentionally, to her. The word hissed from his mouth like venom. To that woman, that Kendra. A rusted gate hinge squeaked to our right. Kendra was walking past on the sidewalk, coat collar turned up, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She caught my eye and gave a small nod, then kept going. Her presence, even that brief, seemed to tighten the air between Mitch and me. You don't see it, do you? Mitch said, almost pleading now. She's not family. She's not blood. I leaned back slightly, resting my hand over the smooth new binding of the ledger. She's not blood, but she is legacy. Mitch's mouth moved without sound for a moment. Then he barked a bitter laugh. Wow, that's what this is about. Some grand gesture from Mom's past. You think that's noble? I reached for the ledger, opened it gently to the final page. The ink was Helen's blue, curved, unmistakable. Paid forward in full, I read aloud. Mitch blinked. What the hell does that even mean? It means, I said, sliding the book toward him, that your mother believed her money could do more in the hands of someone building a life than someone maintaining one. He didn't sit. He didn't even touch the ledger. He stood there shifting between anger and something dangerously close to heartbreak. You think this makes you righteous, he said. You think Mom would want you cutting me out? I didn't cut you out, I said calmly. You're still in the will. The cabin in Oak Ridge, the car, the investments she left in your name are untouched. But not the estate, he said. No, I said, not the estate. Mitch turned away, hands on his hips, eyes scanning the barren garden like it might offer a rebuttal. She built this house, raised me here, and you're handing it off to a stranger. She taught here, I corrected. Taught thousands, some of them strangers, some of them like Kendra became more. He exhaled hard, shoulders slumping for just a second, then rising again. I'll challenge this, he said. I'll take it to court. You can? I said, still seated. But it's all legal, the revisions were notarized. There are no loopholes, it'll get ugly. I nodded. Yes, and public. But the paperwork's final, you'll gain nothing but headlines. There was a long pause. The kind of pause only two people with too much shared silence can maintain. I looked down at the ledger. There below Helen's final line, the pages were blank. Mitch didn't speak again. He turned, fists clenched, and walked down the stone path, the crunch of gravel fading into the hum of traffic. When I was sure he was gone, I pulled a small envelope from my coat pocket. Helen's handwriting on the front was faint but clear. To Kendra R., please read this when the time is right. I didn't open it. I simply looked out at the sky, turning a bruised gray, the first stars stubbornly pushing through. Then I stood, ledger in one hand and the envelope in the other. The school gym smelled like old paint and fresh promise. Someone had tried to mask the scent with lavender air freshener, but it couldn't quite cover the decades of waxed floors, spilled Gatorade, and elementary school musicals. Folding chairs clattered against the floor as volunteers adjusted rows under a banner duct-taped across the bleachers. The Helen Ledger Initiative, Math for Life. I stood near the entrance, my palms damp in the pockets of my blazer. My name tag read Ray, handwritten in marker slightly crooked. Kendra was already working the room, efficient, gracious, quietly magnetic. She paused beside a display board of student projects, her hand resting on a laminated graph a child had titled My Money Tree. The first student who greeted me was a wiry boy with a nervous smile. You're Helen's husband, I said, and somehow the past tense didn't pinch the way it used to. She really paid for all this, a girl asked, her hair tied in neat pink barrettes. Her eyes were wide with a seriousness rare for her age. I smiled but said nothing, not because it wasn't true, but because the truth felt too layered for a one-sentence answer. As I helped Charles arrange coffee cups near the back, he nudged me. Told you the clean math never tells the whole story. I chuckled, more from nerves than amusement. This is bigger than I imagined. She imagined it first, he said. You just turned the lights on. Guests began filling the chairs, parents, teachers, even the local press. The hum of conversation grew soft laughter, the squeak of sneakers against gym floors. Kendra took the mic, her voice confident but warm. Thank you for coming. This began with one ledger, one teacher, and a belief that math could shape more than numbers. It could shape lives. Applause broke out. I clapped too, though my eyes wandered. Near the gym's rear doors, half-shadowed, stood Mitch. He hadn't RSVP'd. He wore no name tag. Just jeans, a pressed shirt, and a gaze that didn't quite settle anywhere. But he was here. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. Helen believed in balance, not just in budgets, but in how we see each other. She used numbers to build futures. This I gestured to the gym, the banner, the eager faces. This is her final equation. I stepped away from the podium to polite applause. Charles clapped a beat longer, his nod reassuring. Afterward, as the crowd trickled out, I lingered near the supply tables, pretending to restack pamphlets. A familiar voice, hesitant but clear, spoke behind me. "Can I help?" I turned. Mitch was watching me, not with anger, not even with expectation. Just something quiet. Something beginning. I logged into Helen's old spreadsheet that morning, the one labeled Q4 Tax and Tuition Forecast. With a few keystrokes, I renamed the final tab Forgiveness. The air was already warm, an early summer stillness drifting through the screen door. From the porch, the faint clatter of wind chimes reached my study like a memory. The study itself had changed since last year. I'd cleared the old boxes, opened the windows, rearranged Helen's books by subject instead of spine color. On the wall behind me, the torn page from her ledger sat neatly framed, still creased, still yellowed, but now sealed in glass. I tapped through the columns: donations, workshop supplies, a small stipend for Kendra's classroom coordinator. Each number sat balanced, precise. Helen's touch lingered even in decimals. A new email arrived. From Kendra Robinson, subject "One More Thing" attachment, studentletter.pdf. I opened it. Inside was a scanned letter written in green crayon and dotted with eraser smudges. "Dear Ms. Kendra, thank you for showing us how to divide big numbers and for not getting mad when I forgot my pencil again. Math is less scary now." I smiled. Somewhere Helen would have smiled too. Outside, the kettle began to hiss on the stove. I left the spreadsheet open and rose to pour a mug of chamomile tea, Helen's old favorite. The scent of it, warm and slightly bitter, filled the kitchen. On my way back to the study, my phone buzzed once. From Mitch, message dinner soon. No signature, no apology, but no accusation either. I read it twice. Then I typed only 2 words back: "I'd like that." The ledger still rested beside the keyboard. I opened its cover and added one more line, not with ink, but simply in thought, balanced. Then I closed it gently. From the porch, a breeze stirred the chimes again, their notes soft and irregular, like grace doesn't quite follow rhythm, but arrives when needed. As the sun dipped, its light pooled across the desk, touching the glass of the framed torn page. A fracture once now preserved, not to forget, but to remember how we heal. I leaned back and muttered Helen's old saying, half to myself, half to the light. Grace is compound interest. And this time I understood. The ledger sits closed now, sunlight softening its worn leather, stitched and whole at last. A breeze from the porch carries the scent of lilac and old paper, the kind Helen used to favor for her letters. Funny how numbers once meant to tally tuition and taxes became a map back to Grace. Sometimes we're not asked to forgive because it's easy, but because it's necessary for them, for us. A torn page doesn't ruin the book. It just marks where the lesson lives. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story. Feel free to share it in the comments or join me on this quiet corner of reflection.